What box do you check when someone asks you about your race? It sounds like a simple question. You pick up the pen, you find the category that seems closest to who you are, you check the box, and you move on.
Black, mulatto, Chinese, yes, hello, good. Quadroon, no, I see you. And an Indian, no. A person of mixed Black and American Indian lineage is also to be recorded as Black. I heard you call me white twice now, and I have something to say about that. So, I am Blackfeet Indian and Cherokee and Danish.
But what happens when none of these boxes can hold your entire story? What happens when your mother is Black, your father is white, your grandparents come from several different cultures, and the world identifies you differently depending on your skin tone, your hair texture, your last name, or even the person standing beside you? And here is where the question becomes even more uncomfortable. Are you checking the box that reflects how you see yourself, or the box that reflects how America has already decided to see you? That is the conversation at the center of the Season 2 episode of the PBS series, A Seat at the Table, which is titled, When You Are Asked About Race, What Box Do You Check? But in this discussion, it's much bigger than a government form, because those little boxes were never completely neutral. For generations, racial categories have been determined: who could vote, who could own property, who could attend certain schools, and who could marry, where a person could live, and whether that person would receive protection or punishment under the law. So when someone asks, "What are you?" they may believe that you are asking about ancestry, but hidden inside that question is an entire history of power, privilege, exclusion, belonging, and survival. Now, once we uncover who created these racial boxes and why they were created, you may never look at that question the same way again. And maybe that is the real takeaway. Not that identity is something that we can neatly solve within a single mark on a form, but that identity has always been more complex than the systems built to contain it. The boxes remain on paper, but the lived experience of race continues to stretch far beyond them. So the next time you are asked to choose, or asked to define or explain who you are, is it worth remembering that the question is not just about classification? It's about history, it's about perception, and it's about the ongoing tension between how we see ourselves and how the world insists on seeing us. Because in the end, the box may be what gets checked, but it is never the full answer to who you are.
Monica Pearson. Historically, the one-drop rule said that having a certain percentage of African-American blood meant you were Black. But does that rule still apply today?
I'll tell you what that one drop does. You know, my feelings on the one drop rule is this was not our invention. This was a construct of an extremely racist society that could not stand the idea of Black people having any kind of say, power, standing, footing in this country. So now that we, get to the point where we're like claiming people like President Obama. I'm a claim President Obama. I understand that, he's half Black and half white. But I get to claim him as Black, and then I heard people trying to claim him as white or trying to say that he's biracial, he's not just Black.
The PBS episode opens the door to a question that many people, especially multiracial people, have confronted throughout their lives. When you are asked to identify your race, which part of yourself are you expected to choose? And just as importantly, who gets to decide whether your answer is accepted? For many Black Americans, racial identity has rarely been treated as something purely personal. Historically, Blackness was not simply a cultural identity that people freely selected for themselves. It was also a legal and political classification that was placed upon them. Now, that distinction matters because America did not create racial categories merely to describe human differences. Those categories were developed. They were changed and enforced to organize power. Now, during slavery, racial identity helped determine who could be enslaved and whose children could inherit that status. Now, after slavery, racial classification became one of the tools used to maintain segregation, restrict citizenship, prohibit interracial marriage, and preserve economic and political control. Now, in other words, the racial box did not begin as an innocent question. It began as a boundary, and perhaps no idea demonstrates that more clearly than what became known as the one-drop rule. Now, under this social and sometimes legal doctrine, a person with any known degree of African ancestry could be classified as Black, regardless of that person's appearance, upbringing, or other ancestry. Now, think about the contradiction buried inside that rule. Black people were told that Blackness made them inferior, undesirable, and unworthy of equal treatment. Yet the very society that degraded Blackness also insisted that even the smallest trace of African ancestry was powerful enough to determine a person's entire identity. Now, one drop could decide where you lived. One drop could determine whom you were permitted to marry. One drop could separate you from property, education, opportunity, and legal protection. Now, here is the part we cannot overlook. The one-drop rule was never really about measuring ancestry with any scientific accuracy. It was about protecting whiteness as an exclusive political and social category. Now, whiteness had to be guarded because whiteness came with access. Blackness, meanwhile, was made deliberately expansive because Blackness came with restrictions.
Understand that our country is becoming more, and I use the old-fashioned term, colored, because the Census Bureau says by 2045, whites will be the minority in the United States of America. Not only because of the influx of Hispanic, the growth of the Black population, Asian population, but also because of interracial dating and marriage. So you can no longer define a person, as you say, by a race, because if you look at all of us, we all are mixed race. It's just some of us show the qualities of one race more than the other. Right. And I think that that's what concerns me more about this one drop rule. Because, you know, we could all sit here and say, well, we got one drop, so that makes us white.
Right. It never works the other way around.
It never works the other way around.
Right.
Never ever does.
It's because you experience being Black. You don't experience being white. And if you don't experience life as a white person, you shouldn't be claiming it.
That is why a person with one Black parent and one white parent was historically identified as Black rather than white. The system did not divide identity equally between the two parents. It pushed the person toward the group that had been denied power. And although the one-drop rule no longer governs our lives in the same formal manner, its psychological shadow has not completely disappeared. Now, even today, a multiracial person may still identify with more than one race, yet the outside world may reduce that person to whichever identity seems most visible. Now, if the person has brown skin or tightly textured hair, strangers may automatically classify that person as Black. If the person is light enough to be perceived as white, other people may question whether that person is really Black at all. So the box may have expanded, but the policing of identity, that still continues. And this is where the conversation becomes deeply personal.
Here's the other thing with President Barack Obama. He experienced race as a white person and as a Black person.
I don't believe that.
But growing up, he grew up with his white family. And yes, he did receive discrimination because people said, we know your father's Black, so we're going to make you Black. But when you look at how he grew up, his culture was
Right.
more white than black.
Now, that may be true.
However, he embraced his blackness. But then you look at someone like Mariah Carey. For years,
Right.
you know, we all thought she's white, even though we knew she's biracial.
Well, she acted like she was until those record sales started
Right,
falling
until she
down.
needed all the
Then all of a
masters.
sudden it was Jermaine Dupri, can I get a beat though?
Right, right. People want to be black when it's convenient.
Exactly.
You don't look black. You are not black enough. You act white. You only claim that side when it benefits you. Which one are you really? Well, these statements reveal something important. Racial identity is not determined only by ancestry. It is negotiated between self-identification and social perception. Now, a person may know exactly who they are and still spend a lifetime defending that identity to other people. That burden can be especially complicated for multiracial children. Many learn very early that the way they describe themselves at home may not be the way that they are described at school. At home, they may simply be a child surrounded by family, but outside the home, their appearance becomes evidence other people believe they have the right to examine. People ask about their hair. They study their skin. They question whether their parents are really their parents. They demand an explanation for features that do not fit neatly inside their assumptions. And what sounds like curiosity can quickly become an interrogation. Now, that is the microaggression hidden inside the familiar question, what are you? Now, not what is your family background, not how do you identify, but what are you? As though the person standing there is a puzzle that must be solved before everyone else can become comfortable. Now, that does not mean that every question about someone's heritage is malicious. People can be genuinely interested in another's culture and family histories, but intention does not erase impact. The difference is whether the question is asked with respect or with entitlement. No one should be forced to provide their genealogy simply because another person cannot immediately place them inside a familiar category. And this discussion becomes even more complicated when we examine colorism within the black community. Because although the one-drop rule historically classified anyone with African ancestry as black people were not all treated equally inside that classification. Lighter skin could sometimes provide limited access to jobs, education, housing, social circles, or physical safety that darker-skinned people were denied. Yet, that limited access never completely removed the person from the reach of racism. This created a painful hierarchy in which proximity to whiteness could offer conditional privilege, while black ancestry could still be used to exclude the same person from whiteness. Now, that contradiction has left wounds that remain visible today. Some light-skinned or racially ambiguous people have experienced rejection from white spaces while also being viewed with suspicion in black spaces. And that brings us back to the box. On a form, a racial category may look like a simple data point, but that information can affect how governments understand discrimination, distribute resources, enforce civil rights protections, study health disparities, and identify communities that have been historically underserved. So, there is another tension here. Why would lawmakers need to create legal definitions determining exactly how much ancestry made someone black? Well, the answer is that race has real consequences, but the categories themselves were socially and politically constructed. Skin color is real. So perhaps the most revealing part of the question, what box do you check, is the answer may change depending on where the question is being asked. Before we ask another person, what are you? Perhaps we should first ask ourselves why we believe we need the answer. Because the box a person checks may tell us something about their identity, but the way that we respond to that answer tells us something far more revealing about our own.